Hi, Kent Lee here. Let's say some friends or relatives are giving you advice on health and stuff based on things they've heard on the news or what they've heard on the internet. Don't pop your knuckles, it'll give you arthritis. Here, have some of these nuts every day. It's good for your brain, right? Or hey, you've got a new baby. Your relatives say, hey, we bought you some Beethoven CDs because we've heard that playing classical music will make your baby smarter. Are you going to buy into all of this? And especially, are you going to change your lifestyle based on these things you hear? Alright, this is important. Today we're talking about science and health news. And this is not only relevant if you are maybe a college student writing a paper about such a topic, but also for our daily lives, our daily information consumption, because we often make lifestyle choices based on these things that we hear. And we need to talk about how to properly understand this information because it can be confusing if you don't know how science works. So that's what we'll talk about on today's English Wiki video. A lot of this stuff we hear from the general news media as well as from popular sources and unreliable sources on the internet. When it comes to even the better news outlets, they can be good sources of information for politics, current events, business news, analysis, and such. But when it comes to news about science-related topics, they tend to fall short. And this is true for a lot of media outlets. This includes areas like health, medicine, nutrition, psychology, language, and education topics. All kinds of stuff out there, as well as general science information. People tend to hear sometimes contradictory things or inconsistent things over the years. Last year you were telling us that a study said that coffee was bad for us. Now you're telling us it's good for us. People tend to get confused and they tend to distrust science and medicine, unfortunately, and it's not the fault of science or the scientific methods. It's really the fault of the popular and general news media because they often don't know how to report science and health news. So I'm going to walk you through it and how to understand it. There are many examples. Nutrition. Something is good for you, something is bad for you, something may give you cancer, something will make you live longer, something's good for your brain, good for your heart, good for your children, good for making them smarter. Coffee, alcohol, whatever, all kinds of stuff out there. So, the big problem is that journalists, news outlets, they are trying to get views, they're trying to get clicks on their website, they're trying to sell advertising dollars, and so they like to put out kind of attractive sounding headlines, sometimes as clickbait. This is good for your brain. This will give you cancer. It's clickbait sometimes. And it will get you to click on it and read the article, so they serve you advertising. But it's not necessarily accurate because while maybe these journalists and these news media outlets may be good at general news, they are not at all trained in science news, in science and how science works. So some of the big problems are this. Many times they report on one study. Often it's one small-scale initial study. And in science, that does not establish something as true. It does not establish a relationship. It is not enough to show that X causes Y, or this is really good for you, or this is bad for you. That is not how science works. Often there are later follow-up studies, and the news media generally don't report these. And the follow-up studies might contradict the initial studies because the initial studies were flawed or had problems. The news media don't report this, and they don't really understand how to tell if a study is good or newsworthy or not. A lot of times they report a connection between a certain food and a health outcome, but we know in science that correlation does not necessarily mean causation. There are certain times when we can't say that, as I'll talk about. But a lot of times they're reporting an initial study, and to say because people ate more nuts and they seem to have better intellectual abilities, it doesn't mean that the nuts are responsible for that. It could be a lot of other factors responsible. Correlation does not mean causation unless certain criteria are met. So a lot of times they're reporting initial studies, maybe flawed studies, that are not newsworthy and shouldn't be reported on. They really should not report something until the medical community or the scientific community have done enough studies and have reached a consensus on whether or not this is a thing. So let's talk basically about how science works. And again, this is true for a number of different areas. My training was in educational psychology and linguistics, where I've done some experimental research and other kinds of research, and I've been trained in the use of statistics. And similar research designs, methods, and statistics are used in all of these fields: education, language, psychology, health, medicine, nutrition. They all use very similar methods. So I feel like I'm qualified to talk about this, and I certainly feel like I need to because this stuff bothers me. So a lot of times research on a particular topic will start with a small initial study, maybe about 30 subjects. Let's say I'm interested in a particular teaching method. Let's say I want to research a new teaching method for teaching a certain grammar form to, say, Korean learners of English. Well, I'll do an initial small-scale study of maybe about 30 participants, 30 subjects. Why? One, it's a fairly feasible number. I probably don't need to get a big grant in order to do this. I can do this with fairly limited resources that I have if I'm a researcher. And two, 30 is sort of a magic number for statistics. You start to get meaningful statistical results with about 30 subjects. It doesn't mean that the results are guaranteed to be valid, it just means that they are statistically useful. Whether the results are valid and credible, that's a different issue. So if I do this initial study with 30 subjects and I get positive results, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that the stimulus caused improvement in the students. I still need to confirm causality later. But again, this one study is not enough. There could be other factors involved I have to check for. So I or other researchers will say, hey, here's an interesting effect. Let's test this some more. We need to do replication studies. In all of these fields of research, we have to do replication studies. We have to do larger tests. We have to do larger studies with more subjects to look at other possible factors or variables, because there might be an important variable that I didn't control for in the first study. So other researchers will jump in and they'll do their replication studies, and only after enough research, enough studies have been done, can we really say, yes, this is a thing, this causes that, X causes Y, X leads to Y. When it comes to maybe an important health or medical or nutritional question, something that has real importance for public health, probably scientists will, after some replication studies, will want to do a large-scale comprehensive study. And after that study is done, then the health community or medical or scientific community will then agree, okay, this is a thing, and we'll recommend that we use this drug or this treatment. Another thing that we want to get a causal explanation or causal theory. Why does X cause Y? Because again, we want to make sure that X is causing Y, that this treatment is leading to these good outcomes, and it helps if we have an understanding of why. Does X directly cause Y? Does it indirectly cause Y? Somehow does this drug interact with the brain tissues or the brain transmitters or something in a way such that we can be sure that this chemical really does make your brain work better, for example? We have to have a causal explanation. So let's talk about some of the examples that we've heard in news media over the past several years. In the early 2000s, there was a study claiming that exposing children to classical music led to greater intelligence on intelligence tests that they gave to the children later on. Some children were exposed to classical music and they showed better results on intelligence tests. This was widely reported on in the news media. It was labeled the Mozart effect. However, follow-up studies found no effect, and psychologists pretty much agree now there's nothing there. The first study was flawed. The first study failed to really control for another factor. Some children's parents in the study were of a higher socioeconomic status, and thus the parents more likely to have books at home for their kids, more likely to read books for their children, which explains their outcomes on the intelligence tests. The music had nothing to do with it. Now, the classical music might have other benefits, calming children, introducing them to fine music appreciation, but it won't make them smarter. We're pretty sure of that now. Health effects. All of these things you've heard about, nuts or fish being good for the brain, not true. Or some magic food is supposed to help you lose weight just by eating it or drinking it, not true. Alcohol. There have been sometimes contradictory studies about alcohol or coffee or caffeine. The bulk of the health studies and the consensus of the medical community is that moderate alcohol consumption for most people can have some general health benefits. Although some of the specific benefits you hear about are kind of exaggerated in the news media. There was one recent study claiming that no alcohol is better for you, but that was a very controversial study and one that is not generally accepted, I think, by nutritionists and health experts. Moderate coffee consumption is not bad. It can even be beneficial in some ways. Let's say, for example, you want to study blueberries. Are blueberries good for you? Now, this kind of thing gets harder to do because even with a large-scale study, it's going to depend on a lot of things. The subjects, you've got to control for a lot of factors. The other foods that they eat, their general health, heart health, and other things. If, say, you're interested in the effect of blueberries on heart health. It's going to depend on things like what kind of blueberries are used in these studies. Fresh blueberries, frozen blueberries, blueberry juice, concentrate, powder, pills, whatever. It's going to depend on a lot of things, and it's hard to control for all of the health and diet and lifestyle factors that could be involved. So there are a number of these things where there haven't been enough studies and there just isn't a consensus. Although I'm sure for some reason blueberries are good for you for anything, for the general nutritional benefits and micronutrients, but don't think of them as a magic cure for eye problems. In any of these studies, we want to then establish a causal explanation. Why does this benefit your heart health or your brain function or your longevity or whatever? Now, before you're quick to dismiss everything, there are times when we do say X causes Y. When there are enough studies, enough research studies, and there are certain statistical methods that can be used to establish causation, and we have a good scientific explanation of why X causes Y. So for example, some people might dismiss global warming, human-induced climate change, because they'll say, oh, correlation does not mean causation. Well, we have multiple correlations from many different sources. There are many ways we can measure CO2 levels directly and indirectly, presently, and thousands and even millions of years into the past of the Earth's history, as well as temperature data, directly and indirectly, going back thousands or millions of years in our Earth's history. We do know for a fact, as a scientific fact, that CO2 is a greenhouse gas. It traps heat. We have a clear scientific causality, a clear causal explanation, that as well as correlations in CO2 levels and global temperatures over time, not just within 1 year, but over time. We're talking about climate, not weather. So if you don't think that human-produced CO2 causes climate change and you think CO2 is okay, well, try living on the planet Venus, which has a crapload ton of CO2 in its atmosphere, extremely heavy amounts of CO2 in its atmosphere, where it's a nice toasty 450 degrees Celsius, and try living there and tell us that CO2 is harmless. So, why do news outlets sometimes misreport these studies. Reasons I mentioned, the journalists, the media companies don't understand how science works. They want to put out a cool headline that will get advertising dollars, but also sometimes university PR departments are responsible. A scientist, a professor, a grad student working at a university does a cool study and finds something, then the universities have public relation departments and they hear about it and they send out a press release to the news media, and multiple news media outlets start picking up on this press release. Oh, walnuts make you smarter. Right. Many times it's maybe a distortion of what the researchers originally said. The message, the conclusion of the studies often get distorted, and what is reported is not what the researchers originally said, or again, it's just a small scale study which is not newsworthy. It really shouldn't be reported. So part of the blame lies also in PR and bad information being spread from smaller news media outlets to bigger ones that pick up a cool sounding story, or even some news media companies that specialize in picking up these little small health studies and reporting them on national news, especially in the US. So some of those entities are to blame. So again, it's not until there have been enough studies and the scientific or medical or health community have reached a consensus that this is a thing, should you believe it. So, if you're confused by now, where do you get your information? Not only for doing a college paper, but just for your own personal consumption of information and decisions about your lifestyle and health. Where do you go? Sometimes listen to your common sense. Does it really seem common sense that, this makes you smarter? Well, if so, wouldn't we all be eating these and wouldn't we all be getting smarter by now? Use some common sense. Google it. Sometimes do a Google search and find more than just one source of information to listen to. But especially find maybe a major news media outlet that has a medical journalist or a science journalist working for them who can properly explain and contextualize these kinds of health reports for you. Otherwise, find more professional news outlets, those that specialize in science news and health news, outlets that have properly trained science journalists or medical journalists who are able to engage with the original research studies and interpret them and explain them to you in a way that you can understand with proper context. So it's better to get your science and health and medical news from proper news sources, science, medical news outlets on the internet, and even some good YouTube channels hosted by science and health experts. Also, you can go to Google Scholar and search for maybe more professional or academic sources and maybe the journals where studies are originally reported if you are able to handle that kind of academic information. So whether you're doing a college paper or you are interested for your own sake, some good general science news sources might be Scientific American, New Scientist, Science News, also the SciShow channel on YouTube, and its Psych News subsidiary can be good sources of news. So don't trust everything, and tell your friends or relatives to stop bugging you with their mundane and useless health advice. Tell them not to believe everything on the internet, because just because it's on the internet doesn't make it true. One last message. I'm sorry that I was kind of late in getting videos out. The past few weeks I've been sick with a really bad cold, but I would like to say thank you for watching my channel and for subscribing. Our channel has broken 500 subscribers. I'm really happy, and I want to thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening. So please forward these videos, recommend these videos, click subscribe, watch more of them. Maybe click the little bell icon to get notifications when I drop new ones. I try to drop a new video toward the end of the week. So thank you for joining me, and see you next time. Goodbye.